U.S. trade war is expected to add billions of dollars to things like building AI data centers. That's because all the components needed to do this are mostly imported. And for companies trying to figure out and manage their exposure, it's never been more complicated. But what if we could build a map that could show us how supply chains, tariffs, and trade policy are playing out in real time? I'm Jennifer Strong, and this is Shift.
Now here on the steering column is a device called Auto Cruise. You simply set the speed you want.
Self-driving robo-taxis are already on the road in 2 U.S. cities.
As the disc rotates, a mirror reflects the light in the way that depends on how the signal was recorded.
This is the 100 terabyte empty. I present to you Electro, the Moto Man. Ladies and gentlemen.
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
This episode, a deep dive on tariffs in the latest installment of our oral history project.
Friends, hello. My name is Mike Rignetta. I'm the host of a podcast called Never Post, which is about the internet. Or really, it's about the world and why the world is the way that it is because of the internet. We ask big questions like, why do disgraced politicians join Cameo? Why is it scary and satisfying to block someone? Would you ever create an AI voice clone of a deceased loved one in a show that you don't need to be terminally online to enjoy? But it doesn't hurt. Never Post is at neverpo.st and wherever you find podcasts.
Harness the power of AI agents at scale without vendor limitations. The agency, spelled AGNTCY, is the open source collective building the Internet of Agents to enable seamless agent-to-agent collaboration. Explore use cases on agency.org now. That's agntcy.org.
From Zuckerman Spader. For 5 decades, Zuckerman Spader has been a leading litigation firm trusted by in-house and outside counsel, businesses, and individuals. With offices in Washington, Baltimore, New York, and Tampa, Zuckerman Spader serves clients throughout the country and around the world in high-stakes disputes, enforcement matters, investigations, and at trial. When the lawyer you choose matters most. Online at Zuckerman.com.
So just like a social network connects people through a digital medium, we're actually a network for connecting and managing the world's physical goods. I'm Evan Smith. I'm the CEO and one of the 3 co-founders of Altana. Altana is the world's first and only product network. Everything that we touch every day has an origin story beyond the direct t-shirt or iPhone or even the pencil on your desk. And what I mean by origin story is there's what's called a value chain. So a value chain is that extended network of production that in almost all cases goes back to the soil itself. Take your smartphone. I know that Foxconn actually assembled that phone. It wasn't Apple who did it. Apple designed it, but Foxconn assembled it. You might go further and say, okay, I know that Corning made that special glass that allows you to interact with the phone and swipe your finger around it. And a lot of people would also know that TSMC in Taiwan, the big famous semiconductor manufacturer, was the manufacturer of the chips in that phone. And beyond that, I challenge the ordinary non-supply chain expert to say anything more, right? But each one of those component parts has subcomponents and subcomponents and subcomponents, and that goes all the way back to the soil. So it turns, it's the graphite, it's the aluminum, it's the copper, it's the silicon that's coming out of the ground and being transformed step by step by step by step by step. And so we get the iPhone and, as consumers, we're only thinking about the physical goods that we interact with in terms of what we wear and consume. And what Altana does is actually illuminate and make it possible to manage that whole value chain of production, really for every single product on Earth. And the way we do that is we use artificial intelligence applied to the largest network of supply chain data that's ever been connected. and we render all these billions and billions and billions of supply chain data points into this Google Maps for the supply chain that makes it possible to see the comings and goings and movements and transformations of all these physical goods across all the facilities in the world, managed by all the companies in the world. And what's more, we make it possible for, I'm just going to not literally say Apple, but just to continue the metaphor, Apple or the very large brand or manufacturer or retailer, we make it possible for them to not just see that network, but then to connect and manage across that network beyond a direct supplier relationship. And you say, okay, well, why is that interesting and why is that even novel? The answer is that over the last 75 years, the trend in global business has been toward globalization. And the animating force of globalization has been outsourcing. And outsourcing is the deliberate, externalization of that value chain. We're economically motivated, we're financially motivated to do less and less and less of that, full value chain of manufacturing. And then that sort of migrates and disperses across the world, and that production goes to the places where there's lower costs and more specialization in that specific thing. And that has a lot of kind of economic textbook benefits, right? And there's been a lot of wealth and profit created. There's been a lot of people lifted out of poverty. But one of the characteristics of that way of doing business is we don't know how to actually make the iPhone. We don't know how to make the 737 end to end. We don't actually understand or control that whole process. And world events have sort of caught up to us, and it's now imperative that we know and manage that whole process, whether we're a retailer or a brand or a manufacturer or a government, right? And the governments are the ones really driving a lot of the policy and, to some extent, purchasing behavior that's motivating this huge sea change in the global trading system. Tariffs started ramping up under the first Trump administration, and they typically took the form of what are called 301 or 232 tariffs. These are little arcane trade policy nerd things that people like me follow. What they mean in practical terms is a surgical tariff to remediate some sort of non-market behavior from a trading partner, exporting goods that are illegally subsidized by the exporting country. There are massive legal processes that are required in the U.S. trading system and in international trade to build up an evidentiary basis and make the claim and defend the claim of some non-market behavior, right? So it takes a long time to actually put in place one of these countervailing tariffs. We saw these pop up around steel and aluminum. We saw these pop up around some textiles. And they've been surgically used here and there over the last decades, but really the trend kind of began in the Trump administration. It actually accelerated in the Biden administration. It wasn't as full-throated, but they were absolutely adding more and more tariffs across more and more product categories, mostly but not exclusively aimed at China. And then we get to April 9th and Liberation Day and the sort of shock and awe. So what does this all mean? The bipartisan consensus in the United States is now that the free trade at all costs mindset might have been economically rational from like a textbook MBA standpoint, but the practical costs of that behavior, and really especially vis-a-vis China, where you have a rising great power who's been exploiting that free trade system to advantage its own markets, its own national champions, incredible industrial policies and subsidies that we can talk about. But the net of it is that China now has become this unstoppable industrial powerhouse who has strategic control of almost all of the most important stuff on Earth at the value chain level, right? So critical minerals and magnets, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, biologics, all of the production capacity for renewable energy. You go down the list and it's not a secret. They actually publish their 5-year economic plans every 5 years, and they say, we are going to invest in and dominate these things, and they have about a 90% track record of pulling that off. So they've been coming up the maturity curve, and they've been taking on more and more of the most important things. And so I think, as the security competition became more and more clear, the economic security vulnerability became a bigger and bigger problem. And now you're seeing tariffs as the way to respond to that, one of the big ways to respond to that. And it's got this bipartisan, I wouldn't say consensus, but this bipartisan kind of convergence where the populist right likes it for the imperative of reindustrializing. And I think the populist left connects with the same premise. And I think the kind of national security center sees the imperative of creating the conditions for American industry to become more resilient and more self-sufficient on these like really important critical supply chains.
AI agent collaboration isn't all that easy for enterprises. As an open source collective, the agency, spelled AGNTCY, is building the Internet of Agents, a shared collaboration layer where AI agents can discover, communicate, and collaborate. To learn from AI innovators such as Cisco, Crew AI, LangChain, and MongoDB, visit agency.org and explore use cases now. That's agntcy.org.
This show is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
Data centers are super interesting because we tend to think about data centers in terms of the GPUs and maybe some of the like photonics and load balancing software that goes into them. But data centers are the product of an enormous global value chain. And even just the build out of the data center itself is its own kind of massive bill of materials, right? Like between the concrete, the copper, the steel, you go down the list and it's its own little factory, right? Or I should say its own big factory. So the point to make there is that a data center is sitting on top of this massively complex and interconnected and vulnerable global value chain. So tariffs accumulate and they add to the cost of the data centers and the buildup and accumulation of tariffs. And I think the other more profound thing to explore is like, in this trade war, China pulled this massive lever on the United States, which is the export controls of critical minerals and permanent magnets. And that sounds kind of niche and why is that interesting? But it's such a big deal. It's because China has amassed a virtual monopoly on the refining and processing of all these critical minerals. So things that, turn into explosives, things that turn into advanced electronics, just about everything in a data center runs through China. And so do, the world's pharmaceuticals, and so do the world's automotives, and so do the world's biologics, and you go down the list. But for critical minerals in particular, and if you think about artificial intelligence as the commanding heights of the 21st century, the entire value chain of a data center is fundamentally dependent on China giving us permission to make it. That's a profound vulnerability. And what they did in the negotiation, and what they're still doing, frankly, is withholding the export of those products that they have a virtual lock on as negotiating leverage in the trade deals. And so I don't know how this one's going to play out, but I think that's going to be, one of the most interesting things that happens in the whole trade war over the next couple of years. And it has obvious implications to the AI race, but it also has these very deep and practical implications for our defense industrial base. If your adversary controls your ability to make explosives, or to make the coatings on a stealth fighter, or to make the chips that would then go into all your advanced missiles and guidance systems, I don't know, that's a pretty fundamental existential vulnerability. And there's no prospect for remediating that in the immediate term. We're about 7 years in. We've raised just under $400 million in venture capital, companies valued at $1 billion. We're fortunate to work with the biggest companies and government agencies on Earth. right? So our go-to-market has been really aimed at these very large manufacturers and government agencies and logistics providers that not only have a lot of data about the supply chain network, but that are very large actors in the supply chain network, because we're using them to then pull in their broader ecosystem. We built a platform that uses artificial intelligence at every single layer of the stack, right? So we're using artificial intelligence to process and render and combine and make sense of all this federated data across, these both public and private data sources. We use artificial intelligence to actually map out those value chains. We use artificial intelligence to do things like determine the nature of all the products in the world and their customs classifications and their rules of origin for, trade compliance and tariff purposes, their actual tariff claims we use AI for. And then we use AI to detect risk and to compute business interruption and the expected value of a failure in one part or the other. So as you kind of go up and up the stack, we're using AI. And then in the user interface itself, we have all these agentic workflows that help our customers deal with this complexity and kind of do work while they're away. A lot of people are saying, hey, the markets spoke and, everyone's at the negotiating table again. I would take the underside of that bet. I would say we're probably in the early stages of this whole cycle of trade disruption and trade dislocation. I think it's going to persist past the Trump administration. And I see that as really the consequence of those mega trends that I spoke to in the beginning. You've got China rising and the great power competition and all the national security and economic security struggles that are playing out. You've got the climate crisis, and you've got this structural fragility that everyone's racing to solve, which in a lot of ways is getting exacerbated by the first and second. So you're going to see more tariffs, more component-based tariffs, more export controls, more investment restrictions, more industrial policy, basically more government engagement and to some extent, control of the global trading system than ever before. And when I talk to boards of directors and C-suites and our customers, and again, our customers are very large organizations, Fortune 500 companies, and to a T, everyone has told me that the number one issue, consideration in steering their businesses over these time horizons is no longer markets, it's geopolitics.
This episode was produced by me and Emma Cillekens and mixed by Garret Lang, with original music from him and Jacob Gorski. Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Strong. Harness the power of AI agents at scale without vendor limitations. As an open-source collective, the agency, spelled AGNTCY, is building the Internet of Agents to enable seamless agent-to-agent collaboration. For business leaders, this means faster innovation and scalable solutions tailored to the multi-agent software your enterprise is creating. Visit agency.org to explore use cases now. That's agntcy.org.